Am I live? Good to see you, Joanne. That is such good news. I always like seeing that. Joanne says, my book arrived today. Doubt about Madeleine McCann. By the way, a book arrived for me, I think yesterday, a book on Elvis. And for me, the test of a good book is, can I get past the first 2-3 pages? And I did manage to do that. So I hope you are able to do the same. Isam Kovalinsky says it's a good book. So I'm a little bit downhearted today. I've just watched the movie Ticket to Paradise, I think that's the name, with George Clooney and Julia Roberts. That's not why I'm downhearted. Just watched that. I shed a couple of tears watching Roger Federer say goodbye to tennis. It was just so touching what he was saying to his wife, that, you know, thank you for supporting me. You didn't have to support me up until 41. You could have expected me to give up tennis early, and thank you for supporting me as well as you did for as long as you did. And I don't know, I just found that so touching. You'd almost think that that is to be expected, that someone would support you, but it's not. It's not a given. It's not a guarantee. But that's also not the thing that I'm a bit downhearted about. I started training for a triathlon that I was supposed to take part in today. I was training basically since March this year, and I've just had one injury after the next. And so, yeah, today arrived, and I obviously wasn't at the starting line. So that's what I'm feeling a little bit glum about. Just had so many injuries. I broke a rib. I hurt my medial meniscus, my knee. I've had some really serious problems with my gluteus muscle. All sorts of problems that I've never ever had before, and it's definitely not fun. But I guess it's life in a way. You know, the things that happen to you that are just, it's kind of a bummer. It's unexpected, and it's not the fairy tale that you think it's going to be. So I guess I'm going to be restarting my training for next year. So it kind of feels like a wasted year in a sense, but maybe not necessarily. So anyway, what we're going to do in this live is we're going to recap about 6 cases. Some we're going to go through quicker than others. We're going to go through Alec Baldwin first, then Caitlin Armstrong, then Loriu Vallow, that's 3. Then Madeleine McCann, that's 4. Then Alex Jones, that's 5. And then we may touch on Kylie Rodney sort of quickly. That's 6. And then we're going to go from that into just where I want to talk a little bit about true crime in general. I want to talk about where it's going, what I think about it, what other people think about it, and then also hear what you guys think about it, right? You guys being the true crime community. Make sure you vote in the poll. I see that it is currently at, I think, what was it, 40%. Most of you basically voting for Caitlyn Armstrong. As it happens, that is the hardest content right now to find, just because there's nothing really happening. Not absolutely nothing. There was a documentary that came out. I might play you guys a little clip from that. I just want to check the poll. 46% say you want to hear more about Caitlin Armstrong, 30% Loriu Vallow, 20% Alec Baldwin, and 4% Gabby Petito. Wow, very few of you want to hear about Gabby Petito. Oh, by the way, we are going to talk about Gabby Petito today as well. So there's been some very surprising news in the Gabby Petito case that I haven't actually seen anywhere. And I do want to sort of touch on that. So shall we get started with Alec Baldwin? Wow. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Joanne. Let me bring that up. That's definitely setting the pace for tonight. We'll see. Thanks very much, Joanne. I appreciate it. Yvonne Phillips, good to see you. Esemko Valinsky, Bria, Jennifer Waite, all you guys. Okay, so here we go. Let's get going. So we're going to kick off with Alec Baldwin. This is an article from Fox News. Alec Baldwin, Rust case. New Mexico grants prosecutors funds to move forward in movie set shooting probe, right? Now, although this doesn't seem like very big news, it actually is very big news. And I'm sure Alec Baldwin himself is quite concerned. And that is because of what is in the subtext there, that Alec Baldwin could face charges. And this question has been in the offing for almost a year now. Is he going to be charged? What is going to happen? You know, and now at last it's sort of coming to that point, right? So basically, at this point, New Mexico has given money to prosecutors to move forward. So the other thing that I think is really interesting is the timing of Alec Baldwin doing the following. So this article is dated September 22, I think. September 23. And this article from the New York Post is dated the day before, September 22. Alec Baldwin lists longtime Hamptons home months after upstate sale and is trying to sell it for 29 million. What do you think that's all about? Sorry, where were we? What do you think that's all about? Do you think that that is related to that? And what is quite interesting in this article is they talk about $300,000, a little bit more than that. Where's that? I don't want to go through this whole article. Just trying to find the dollar value that they cite. There it is. So the State Board of Finance has granted around $317,000 toward the cost of investigating the shooting. Meanwhile, Alec Baldwin is trying to raise 29 million, right? Do you think that there's a link between the two? So I always say in true crime, two of the essential pillars to true crime are timing and context. Timing is one of the most important and I think most underestimated pillars of true crime. When a crime happens, not only the day of the week, but also the time of day, that can often tell you a lot. And that's often why perpetrators are at so much pains to hide the time that something happens. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through the subtext of these charges, right? So those of you on Patreon will have been sort of, to some extent, aware of this. Paulina, it's a kind of an open question. Is he trying to get cash? Is he trying to sort of, in anticipation of a potential trial, is he trying to make cash available for that? The other possibility is that he's, I mean, sometimes it's the opposite, that you actually can't get someone's money because it's sent to the Cayman Islands or something. So one just wonders what the case is there. I'm just saying the timing is definitely interesting. So It's not yet official that charges are coming, but there are whispers that charges are going to be filed and that this case is actually going to trial. And it does make me wonder, if this case goes to trial, isn't this going to be the most high-profile trial in America if and when it goes to trial? For me, it's hard to imagine it wouldn't be. It kind of makes sense that there are biggish stirrings right now if it is about to go to trial. We're around about a month shy of the 1-year anniversary, and there's likely to be and should be protests and indignation if we do pass that 1-year mark, right? I think people that are sympathetic to Helena Hutchins, people in the movie industry, I think they're going to be rightfully wounded and upset. It's like adding insult to injury. The fact that a year later, wow, have you still not reached a conclusion in terms of investigation, right? I did mention this in a previous episode dealing with intertextuality with the Rodney case, that you can have these investigations taking a heck of a long time. And then you say, why? Why is it taking so long? Is it a cover-up, right? And the answer is, when things aren't certain, law enforcement have got to be very, very careful. That's the answer. So what is happening? Well, it looks like the state of New Mexico, in anticipation of charges and thus a prosecution. Let's get back to this. In anticipation of charges and thus a prosecution, have allocated quite a hefty sum, a budget, to investigate. And I think the word investigate really means prosecute, because they've already been investigating for 11 months. Who do they want to prosecute? Those implicated in the Rust incident. Who are those implicated in the Rust incident? So that's a question I'm going to put to you guys. Who would you say are implicated in the Rust incident? Any ideas there? Do you think it's one person? Do you think it's 3 people? Do you think it's a dozen people? How many people do you think are involved there? That's another thing that makes an investigation take quite a long time, when you've got multiple sort of perpetrators, right? So I've got to say, I sort of wonder whether the budget was the problem all along, and whether New Mexico drew this out in order to save or accumulate funds, given who they are up against. It's just a hunch. Of course, it could also be that the results of the investigation have only recently become known to the DA's office, and as such, and because this case hasn't fizzled in the public's imagination, maybe someone was hoping it would just go away and people would forget about it. It hasn't disappeared from the media either. It hasn't really been that big on social media, but they do now have to take that tough step and actually possibly maybe prosecute. In a way, where we are sort of coming to right now feels a bit like the prosecution in Boulder of the John Benet Ramsey case. You kind of got the feeling the district attorney didn't want to be in that position, right? The district attorney was reluctant to be in that position and reluctant sort of to take the case forward. Didn't you get that feeling? It feels like something similar here. Now, of course, it could also be that the results of the investigation have only recently become known to the DA's office. And sorry, I've just said that. I've just read that. Sorry about that. I think if they are about to prosecute, they know it's not going to be easy. With Alec Baldwin, they likely fear it could be an uphill battle. So now I'm going to quote something from this Fox News article, right? It says, quote, New Mexico agreed to provide funds allowing the possibility of prosecutions involving the on-set shooting of cinematographer Helena Hutchins by Alec Baldwin while filming Rust, as reported by the Santa Fe Mexican on Thursday. right? So these funds are to allow the possibility of prosecutions. So it is quite weird, the language they use, where they sort of say it's also for an investigation, right? Terry says, in traffic, I'll join in a bit. Faticus, well done for making it. Becky Shetter says, I think there are 3 people that could be prosecuted or charged. Jody says at least 2 people. Mel Stiller says Baldwin, the armorer, and who else? We're going to sort of look into that. Helena says 3 people. That's a great question from Yvonne. Is $3,000 enough to basically prosecute this case? When you think that they've got 300,000 and one of the, I don't know, is it litigants or litigees? One of the potential people that could be, I guess, defendants has got like 29 million, right? That's like 100 times more money, potentially. It's not 3 million, it's 30 million. Andrea says, we have not heard something in the media. Is that intentional? I think things are moving into the legal end game. And so it's not so much that it's intentional, it's that they are dotting the I's and crossing the T's in all the legal documentation. Things are about to take off in the legal sense, I think. Susan says also 3 people, I think. Okay. Well, think again. I think you may be missing one, maybe. Okay, so the State Board of Finance granted around $317,000, which would go towards the cost of investigating. I don't really understand why they would say that. I don't know if it's the cost of investigating because they've been investigating for 11 months. I don't know if it's to pay for what they've already investigated. I doubt it. I think that should be prosecuting, unless it's to continue investigating. We'll see. The money was granted after an emergency request from First Judicial District Attorney Mary Carmack Altwies to fund a special prosecutor, special investigator, experts, and others. I think that really answers the question what this money is for. It's really to pay. You must remember, when you prosecute a case, as we saw in Depp versus Heard, you've got to pay for experts. You've got to pay for expert legal minds, right? You sometimes could have special investigators going into specialized areas. Okay. Doesn't it seem as though they have been extraordinarily careful, not only in taking a really long time, but even regarding what is being admitted at this late stage of the game? Now, going back to the article, according to the request obtained by the Santa Fe Mexican, up to 4 people could potentially face charges. So that seems to be another way of saying no more than 4 people are going to face charges. Do you guys agree with that? Up to 4 people sounds like the cap is 4 people. So who do you think those 4 people could be? Who do you think those 4 people could be that are facing charges? It goes on to say the DA clarified it is not certain whether any of them will actually be held criminally liable. That gives you kind of an idea that this is going to be, if it goes to court, it'll be a civil trial. It'll probably deal with negligence, right? Who do you think the 4 individuals are that are most likely to face charges here? I'm going to provide you guys with a tentative list. Let me see if you guys have got any other suggestions. So here's my list of who I think may face charges, just my opinion, in the Rust incident, if it's prosecuted, right? So I think it's possibly going to be Alec Baldwin. You guys agree with that? Yeah, so Bria says Alec, Halls, Hannah, and the other prop manager. That's possible. That's not a bad argument. I think you're talking about Sarah Zachary. But I think it could be somebody else. Dave Hall's assistant director. Could he? Thanks a lot, Fatikas. Thanks for that. I don't think the director. It's an interesting point. It's an interesting point. B says the gun overseeing crew. Right. So who is that? Can you remember? So Hannah Gutierrez Reed, the armorer. It's possible that she may be in trouble. I think she's part of the, let me just go to the end of this article. Not that far. Damn, what have I done? So it says here, the film's armorer, Hannah Gutierrez Reed, already has a few lawsuits against her, including a wrongful death claim filed by Hutchinson's family. So there does seem to be some possibility that Hannah could be in a little bit of difficulty, right? And then I think someone that maybe some of you may have missed or forgotten about, again, this is just my opinion. What about Seth Kenny? Could there be, bear in mind, he provided the ammunition to the production. Yeah, so Pauline says Hannah has no money. Yeah, well done. Mel Max says the ammo supplier. So he is the ammo supplier, right? Seth Kenny. Now, the other question is, in what order do you think the culpability goes? So I've mentioned 4 names, and if you accept those names, and it's just really a tentative list, it's just an opinion. But if you in theory say, okay, well, we have this list, who do you think would be at the top of the list and who would be at the bottom? Would it be in the order that I've given it to you? Would it be Baldwin, Halls, Gutierrez Reed, Seth Kenny? Bear in mind how the live round seemed to get onto the set, arguably, and that's certainly what they are going to argue, seems to have come from the ammo supplier. So if the ammo supplier never supplied it, nothing would have happened. So is he the most culpable person in the story? I think another way of arguing it is you could say the person who's the most culpable is the person who had the most responsibility for the overall production. You could also put a slash there and say, and also the person who's holding, or you could say the person who held the gun when it went off or fired the gun, right? It's just quite an interesting thing to think about from the perspective of if you are the prosecutor. If you're the prosecutor, how are you going to be thinking about it? In other words, should the hierarchy of responsibility be like this, in theory? would you choose different names? Would you swap around the order? How would you have it? So Phil says, what's your personal opinion? Do you actually think Baldwin would ever lose? I'm not going to give my opinion on that. May says, oh my God, great catching you live. Hello, everyone. Good to have you with us. Helen Fenner says, whoever handed the gun to Baldwin, well, that's actually a point of dispute. There's some versions that say that Hannah handed the gun over. I don't think she says so. And there's another version that the assistant director handed the gun over. You would imagine that there wouldn't be any difficulty with that because there were like 12, 14 people in the room. So you would imagine there wouldn't be a lack of witnesses, but who knows? Pauline says, I'd put Hannah on the bottom because she's penniless. I don't really think that that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual culpability. It's not to do with how much money you have, it's actual culpability. Okay, so some interesting thoughts that you guys are sharing here. So in this article, it says that the district attorney said that one of the possible defendants is well-known movie actor Alec Baldwin. I don't think that's rocket science. I don't think that is inventing the wheel. I don't think it's really a surprise. But in a way, it's the first time it's really been publicly stated. People have been thinking about it for quite a while. It's kind of when the FBI report came out not that long ago saying it appears that you cannot fire the gun, the model he had, but also the specific weapon that he was holding without pulling the trigger. That was kind of quite an official document, basically saying something that also seemed kind of obvious. The gun didn't fire itself, did it? And that is something that Baldwin was sort of saying or suggesting, that I didn't pull the trigger. The gun kind of went off, right? Now, what he might be trying to sell or trying to say is that he didn't intentionally do that, kind of do a cross draw and pull the trigger. When he did the cross draw, maybe something happened. I'm just saying that may be his argument. We'll see what it is. So I don't know if you've noticed that the district attorney seems to be sort of rolling out the red carpet, basically trying to calm the storm that is inevitable, basically saying, you know what, one of the possible defendants is well-known movie actor Alec Baldwin. I don't know if that's too much of a surprise. Then the article goes on to say, Carmack Altwees declined to mention which members of the cast and crew are under investigation, but revealed the charges brought forth by the prosecution include a wide range of charges from homicide to violation of the state's gun statutes. If you think about that, who could be in trouble for violating the state's gun statutes? Okay. Now, bear in mind, remember, homicide isn't murder. The word homicide doesn't mean murder, although it can mean that. Homicide can also simply mean killing of another person. That means killing can be accidental or unintentional. can you see once again we're in this Kylie Rodney territory? Was it an accident? Was it foul play? And the part that we seldom think about is, what about that sort of gray area in between, where it's not an accident, and I don't think what happened in the Rust incident was totally an accident, and it's not foul play either. It's not like someone wanted to commit murder, wanted to kill someone. It's something in that muddy middle ground, right? In my view, what happened here was unintentional, but not strictly speaking, as I say, an accident. Also, for the record, not foul play in the extreme sense of those words, but the live bullets coming on set is certainly not innocent. Someone was responsible for that, and not, I think, not even just one person, I think maybe several. Then the article goes on to say a final report on the findings of the investigation is expected soon. So in a weird way, in the same way that we are awaiting a final report in the Rust incident 11 months later, something that seemed pretty simple and straightforward. It wasn't like they needed 2 weeks to find the gun or to find poor Helena, right, as you had in the Kylie Rodney case. The main difference here is the sort of complexity of the hierarchy of command and all the interrelationships. And you also kind of have, in the Kylie Rodney case, you had the party goers that you don't know really what's going on with them and what was going on at the last moment. In the Rust incident, you had people leaving the party the morning of the incident. In other words, you had those 6 people in the camera crew, I think 6 people, left the set. They were protesting and complaining about safety and other issues. And so that just complicates this whole thing. An accident waiting to happen. Someone else says safety failure. But kind of the word that I think needs to be applied in the Rust incident is responsibility. Were you responsible, in terms of running, in terms of safety protocols on set? And in a very weird way, you can apply that same word to those seniors at the party at Prosser Lake. Were they responsible? Were they responsible in terms of themselves, drinking and driving? Were they responsible in terms of other people drinking and driving? It's the same kind of thing. Yeah, you have it with a gun. Were you making sure someone else wasn't using a gun that was loaded? If you think about the idea of a loaded gun and someone who's intoxicated driving a vehicle, it's kind of a similar thing, if you think about it like that. So the end of the article is quite interesting. It says, so a final report's coming soon. So it shows you it can take as long as 11 months. Baldwin was holding the gun when it fired accidentally, killing Hutchins and wounding director Joel Souza. It's quite interesting language where they say it fired accidentally. Despite a recent FBI forensic report, let me bring that up, right? If FBI completes forensic report. Despite that report that said that the gun could not have fired a bullet unless he pulled the trigger, Baldwin claims he never pulled the trigger. So that is kind of a question of legal import or legal relevance, right? And it makes you kind of wonder, theoretically, can New Mexico argue that with their $300,000 budget, that the gun couldn't have fired on its own? And can Baldwin, if he's in that situation, can he argue with a potentially $30 million budget? I'm talking about possibly for lawyers, who knows what he wants to use the money for, but let's say it was for a legal team. Could they argue that guns do fire themselves all over the place? Okay, so that is really concluded the Baldwin section, so the first section of the 7. Do you see how there's this weird thing of accident when the gun couldn't have gone off by accident, according to the FBI? And yet, even if fired intentionally, it was clearly not Baldwin's intention, I think, to kill his cinematographer or to seriously wound his director. So that's that. So now we're going to deal with Caitlyn Armstrong. And you guys may or may not know there's a documentary on Dateline, NBC Dateline, called, what is it called? The Last Ride, I think. Did anyone see that? Let me know in the comments. Did anyone see The Last Ride? Anyone here seen The Last Ride? Robin says the COVID restrictions affected Hannah's ability. Helena says, I watched it. Terry says, I've only seen half of it so far. A couple of you say you haven't seen it. So Helena and Terry, what did you think? What feeling did you come away with after having watched that? Quite a few say, I haven't been able to watch it. I might play the trailer for you guys here, just without the sound on. Let's see if I can bring something up here. So we're now going to deal with Caitlyn Armstrong. I want to just show you guys a couple of images. Are you guys familiar with this case? So this case is to do with world-class athletes, cyclists actually. This is Mo Wilson. She's 25 years old when she was shot to death, 3 bullet wounds. And these are some of the other, well, not that. So that's kind of the crime scene. This crime happened in Austin, Texas. Okay, that's not what I want to show you. So yeah, some other images. Not quite sure why I didn't show these. That's Colin Strickland. That is the partner of Caitlin Armstrong. I think he's 36 years old. She's 35 years old, if I remember correctly. Mo Wilson was a 25-year-old. Mo Wilson and Colin are both top elite cyclists, and Caitlin was the partner of this one, and of course she wasn't a sort of top rider. Not quite sure why it's not showing these images in order. There's another image of Colin Strickland. Is a gravel bike rider. Okay. Bria says, how can we watch this? I think you've got to go on to Peacock channel, but I must say I struggled. I tried to watch it and I wasn't able to. Just trying to see if I can bring up something. Where is it? There it is. Okay, so first of all, I want to show you this footage. And you guys see that? So what that is CCTV footage of what appears to be a vehicle passing by quite close to the crime scene. And now the question is, was that Caitlin Armstrong's vehicle? And in the, in the documentary, they were basically saying this entire case turns on digital evidence. For example, this. And her attorney a guy called Kofa, he's saying, well, that means nothing. You can't even see the number plate on this vehicle. And you can't really make out the number plate. Let me bring that up. Can you make out the number plate? So I've got a small counter argument to that. So as I say, Kaitlyn's lawyer has said, if this case goes to trial, my client's going to be acquitted. And he basically seems to cast doubt on this digital evidence, in part by saying that CCTV footage means nothing because you can't make out the number plate. And I've got a little bit of a problem with that. And the problem is based on what you can make out, right? Can you make out the type of vehicle, number one? Can you make out the color of the vehicle, number two? Can you make out idiosyncrasies on the vehicle? In other words, things like, let me try and bring it up. Can you guys see the cursor on screen? Can you see that there's something on the back of this vehicle, right? Now, how many Jeep Cherokees do you think that are black have this thing on the vehicle, right? I don't want to say exactly what this thing is, but there's another thing on the top of the vehicle, that thing and that thing. It looks like a roof rack. So it's not just, that could be any Jeep Cherokee. It's specifically a black Jeep with racks on it. So how many of those are around, right? So let's look at that footage again. So can you see over there, those roof racks are quite clear. There's also something at the back there. Now, I can't say for sure, but that looks to me like it might be a bicycle rack that's in the folded position. I've got a bicycle rack on my vehicle that looks similar to that when you fold it up. That's the question. That's the question. So if you think about the Rust incident and you think about the legal thing that's being argued, the legal thing is Alec Baldwin says, I didn't fire the gun, and the FBI says the gun can't go off without the trigger being pulled. That's kind of the legal thing that's being dealt with there. And you would imagine it's quite a simple legal issue, except the defendant is very kind of powerful and influential and wealthy. In this case, with Caitlyn Armstrong, you've kind of got also a fairly simple question at the end of the day. Does this vehicle have a bicycle rack on it? Yes or no? And a charming, convincing defense attorney might say, for example, he could say, well, if you look at the vehicle here, do you see a bicycle rack? Do you see a bicycle rack kind of where, you know, how clearly, how can you be absolutely sure? Sorry, you guys can't see it. Can you be absolutely sure that you're seeing a bicycle rack? I mean, do you see one there? I don't. Do you see one there? There it certainly seems quite clear, doesn't it? But I suppose you could still argue that there could be half a dozen vehicles like this in Austin with bicycle racks. So in other words, you could raise a certain amount of doubt. That's all he's got to do. So these are the words. I think before I get to that, I'm going to play a short clip. So let me just do that and that. So I'm going to play you guys a very short clip from the NBC Dateline trailer. Obviously without sound, but we'll give you guys an idea. Let's do that. So did you guys catch that where it says race against time? And it seems like in the trailer they playing with the analogies of someone who's a bicycle racer and to some extent the analogies of crime, of the crime that seems to have taken place here. Okay. So that's her. That's Mo Wilson, also a dirt bike rider, 25 years old. And then that is the boyfriend of Caitlyn Armstrong. And there was some talk that Mo Wilson was in a relationship with Colin. There's some talk that they were in an on-off relationship. I think Colin denied at the time that Mo was shot. He said they weren't in any kind of relationship, and that was quite clear. But there is a text from Mo saying, I'm quite confused about what's going on. And on the day that Mo died, Colin and Mo went swimming together, and they had kind of a dinner together as well. Why is it not pausing? So there's again the play on words, time runs out. What do you think they're getting at here? Obviously, they're trying to build tension into their story, but what do you think that they're trying to get at here? It's sort of the play on competitive bike riding, but also a murder that is taking place within this fabric of cyclists, right? So that's a picture of Mo Wilson. That is the kind of the crime scene. What happened was Mo arrived back after swimming with Colin Strickland, then having dinner with him. Then he got on his motorcycle and went home. He then texted his girlfriend Caitlin, but what he texted wasn't completely true. He said something about, I think, fetching flowers. And then, of course, she saw that vehicle passing by this residence. And the question is, was it Caitlin's vehicle? The other thing that's quite interesting is the ballistics that were taken off Mo Wilson's body and the ballistics of the Sig Sauer that was in the possession of Colin and Caitlin, whether there's a match there or not. I think what is being what is being alleged is that someone broke into their home, took the Sig Sauer, and then tried to steal Mo Wilson's bicycle, because Mo Wilson's bicycle was also taken from the scene. And almost in a similar type scenario as Suzanne Morphew, except there's no talk that Mo went riding on her bike at 8 o'clock at night. But it appeared that her bicycle had been stolen, but then they found it stashed in some bushes just around the corner. So that's the other part about this case that's quite touching, is that Mo Wilson was very beloved by her peers. She was very admired. She was very inspirational kind of athlete. She was looking to become a world champion in her sport, and so it really has shaken the cycling community. You've also had other repercussions to this case in, for example, Colin Strickland, who's also a world-class rider. Looks like he's lost some of his sponsorships. Has he been able to continue riding competitively? What's quite interesting is I've interviewed a couple of world-class cyclists when I was a photojournalist. I interviewed Tyler Hamilton, Lance Armstrong's ex-teammate. And by the way, Lance Armstrong lives in Austin. I've interviewed some South African and British riders like Daryl Impey and Chris Froome. And there's actually photos of Chris Froome, who's won the Tour de France a couple of times, training with Colin Strickland. So these are like top, very high level athletes. And so that is kind of the bottom line to this case / question mark. Is there a love triangle? Now, the weird thing is the media been saying been calling this a love triangle in the same way they call the Loriu Vallow case the doomsday couple, or doomsday mom, or doomsday cult mom, or whatever. In this case, they keep talking about a love triangle. And so this documentary is also touching on that, the idea of a love triangle. Two women, the two women being Mo Wilson and Caitlin Armstrong, and then one man, the one man being Colin Strickland. And I think Colin's lawyer is saying that that's not true. There was no love triangle. If anything, what about the boy that Mo was seeing, right? That's kind of so he's kind of also is disputing the number plate. He also seems to be saying that there's no love triangle, and like that's an interesting argument. But the other side of it is Colin Strickland did go on the very day that Mo died. In fact, less than hours before she died, like minutes before she died, Colin Strickland was swimming with Mo and then having dinner. So that's also part of the whole story. So that is Caitlyn Armstrong. And I think what makes this case to some extent quite unique is the caliber of people that are in it. I mean, often you have people that are sort of struggling, or people that have some difficulty that's taking place. It might be substance abuse or money or something. Well, in this case, you've kind of got quite good-looking, fit, and outwardly successful people, and yet within that seemingly fairy tale of top achievement and success, you have seemingly tragedy. Now, I remember when coronavirus started taking place, thinking, I wonder what impact it's going to have on true crime. And I think it has had an impact. I think it had an impact on Gabby Petito in the fact that they couldn't get married and they went on the van life journey in a way as a response to that. I think in the Kylie Rodney case, the same thing is why that party was so big, was because seniors the previous year couldn't really have a party because they just weren't allowed to. And so you've got a lot of pent up emotion, right? And I think in the case of Caitlin, Colin, and Mo, all of this is within the context of sport, and of course sport was another way where the world was shut down, and if you were an athlete you simply couldn't compete, and so you can imagine the pent-up emotion there, right? I think so. Sorry, I wanted to highlight that one. I think it has had lasting effects, Joanne. The Baldwin case is also another case where um, that also had an impact. I'm talking about the virus. In fact, Hannah Gutierrez Reed said the reason she wasn't in the church was because of that, was because there were already 14 people in the church, and as a result of, and you actually see in some of the body cam footage, you see people with masks, and I think there's even a photo of Baldwin himself um, kind of bent over, but he's kind of got a mask on his face or a mask in his hands. Um, that movie was shot in the middle of, you know what? So, what impact did that have on kind of preventing people from being where they should have and frustrating certain processes? I think also the budget movie industry, I think that's really the wrong name. Like the really cheap movies, the demand for very cheap movies was as a result of the movie industry being shut down. I think Rust came about as a result of major sort of cinema being kind of shut down. So you could even argue that the Rust production wouldn't have happened but for, what happened in the past 2 years. Okay, let's take it a bit further. So what that guy you just saw was saying was, he basically said, I didn't see that. I didn't see any jealousy. I didn't see any sort of, I didn't basically see a love triangle, right? And so this question in the trailer is basically saying, was someone watching? Was someone aware of infidelity? Was someone looking at someone else's social media, right? Was someone basically jealous? And ultimately, was there a love triangle? So, in this part of the trailer, anyone can watch the trailer. I'll put a link to this trailer if you haven't watched it. I'll put it in chat. But basically, what they're saying is this entire case is contingent on electronic data. I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. I think that accounts for a third or maybe a half of the case. I think the electronic data is a factor. For example, the vehicle going by, also the text that was sent, also the call records to some extent, also the banking data to some extent, also the time that Mo entered the code in the door. I think it was some sort of digital locking system similar to the Watts home. That's also something that is digitally, there's a digital breadcrumb for that. But I really don't think it's just digital. I think you've also got to look at Caitlin selling a vehicle, which is a black Jeep Cherokee, flying to New York, and then everything that followed from there, right? Does anyone here know which country Caitlin flew to ultimately? Anyone know that? I just want to see how well you know this case. Daisy says, if I recall correctly, Ali used advanced facial recognition. Costa Rica, yeah. I don't think that is true, Daisies. I don't think that's true. Yeah, she went to the Santa Teresa beach in Costa Rica, but there's also, what's the word? There's because it's legally kind of sensitive, you kind of got to say it's alleged that she had plastic surgery. Because can you prove it? Can you absolutely prove that she had plastic surgery? Looks like she had her nose sort of narrowed. She dyed her hair. So Mo Wilson is shot to death, and then almost almost immediately, like a day or two after that, Caitlin abandons her life, flies to New York, flies from there to Costa Rica, and seems to want to, it's not like she just goes on a holiday. Maybe she was, but she gets a job as a yoga instructor in Costa Rica. So it kind of seems quite strange. Didn't she tell Colin, I'm going to go on a holiday? Or what did she tell him? Debbie, what's the name of it? What do you mean, the name of what? Yeah, the surgery was supposed to have taken place in Costa Rica. So there you're seeing, I think, a dramatization of a motorbike. At the time at around about the time that the crime seems to have taken place, Colin was apparently driving or riding his motorcycle home, right? So what they're showing there is kind of a representation of a keypad, and so I think it was like a minute after Mo entered this code into the keypad, someone followed her into the home, and she was shot in the bathroom of this house. It wasn't her house. She was in Austin to do a bicycle race, I think the Gravel Loco, and so she was there staying with a friend in order to travel to this bicycle race. And of course, Colin Strickland would have been taking part in that race as well. So there is the CCTV footage of the vehicle, and I just find it a little bit strange how on earth you can make the argument that that's doubtful. But I suppose if you say, well, because you can't see the number plate, then it does raise doubt. I mean, I think you can't escape that. If you say, but can you see the number plate? You are suddenly thinking, okay, well, it's not 100%. Maybe it's 99, or maybe it's 90, or maybe it's 80. But the job of the defense isn't to win their case, it's just to raise doubt. The prosecution have got to win their case based on, um, making their case beyond reasonable doubt. All the defense have got to do is raise doubts. So to say, yeah, so what? That could be a vehicle, but you can't see the number plate, so that's not enough. That's why I say, where you say that's not enough, maybe you've got a point, but then how do you explain suddenly suddenly selling your car, suddenly rushing off to New York and then to Costa Rica? Well, if you wanted to go to Costa Rica, why not just fly from Texas? It's much closer. And then also, why have you got your sister's passport? And why, or let me ask the question, are you using an alibi? If you're just traveling innocently in Costa Rica, wouldn't you use your own name? So that I think, in a way, fills in the absent confirmation of the number plate. Does that make sense? So that is some additional footage we've got, is also it going down what looks like it could be kind of an alleyway. Let me play that again. That footage there. You can't actually see the number plate there either. So that's the other aspect to this case, and that's definitely what's made this case quite a intriguing and interesting case, because you've got the crime, which is one dimension to it, and then you've got the whole fugitive, or what can you call it, the aftermath to Mo Wilson's murder, that aspect as well. So in a way, you've got two separate stories that are kind of quite interesting. So that is Mr. Kofa, that is Kaitlyn's attorney, and he's is an elite lawyer, and a very expensive lawyer, and he's doing quite a good job of defending his client so far, in my opinion. What's also interesting is the speed at which everything was moving, especially if you compare it to the Kylie Rodney case, even Summer Wells, even Suzanne Morphew. This case moved at a blistering speed, and then it looked like it was going to go to trial. It was going to be a fast track trial, and then suddenly everything slowed down. And that's kind of where we are now. And I get people constantly asking me, when you're going to cover Caitlyn Armstrong. Well, nothing's really happening. It's all kind of it's like legal shadow boxing that's kind of going on. So we're really only going to know what's going on once this case goes to trial, once it's in a courtroom. So I do want to provide you guys with some deeper analysis based on this Dateline documentary. So I will try and get to that at some point. So that is the second of the 6 aspects I wanted to deal with. If you guys want to watch the trailer, you are welcome. I'll just put a link to that in the chat. And now we're going to deal with Gabby Petito. Sorry, let's just bring that up. Okay. So are you guys aware of that Gabby Petito, the officer in charge of the investigation, the officer at Moab, is now a detective? He's kind of been promoted. Are you guys aware of that? Eric Pratt. He's the sort of bald officer that started walking down Brian Laundrie's side and he's not the officer who took Brian Laundrie to that sort of hotel. He's actually been made a detective. Did you guys know that? Now, if you think about it, in the middle of Petitos suing, feels like they're suing everyone. They're suing the Laundries. I think they're suing the Moab cops or the Moab police department. In the middle of that, it says a controversial, the officer responding to the controversial call is now a detective. So that's the one thing I wanted to talk about, because in the poll you guys say only 5% want to really hear about Gabby Petito, which for me is quite sad. Let me just have a look at that poll again. Where is that poll now? 7%. So because you guys are kind of saying you don't really want to hear much about that, I'm not going to talk much about it. But I do want to bring your attention to this as well. Did you know about this? A new witness to the Gabby Petito case said that she was hit with a closed fist. Did you guys know that? That came out August 27, 2022. So you guys may be aware that there was a 911 caller, and then I think there's another 911 caller. I think the one guy's name was Christopher. Then there was another person. Well, this is the third person. This is the third sort of witness. And this is what he basically says. He said that he insisted that Brian was the aggressor, that Brian hit Gabby in the head before she stumbled back against their van. And he shouted over to try and spook the 23-year-old before other locals intervened. The guy's name who provided this information is Chandler. He didn't want to provide his surname. He said that he was just driving by in his truck and he saw them arguing at the back of their vehicle. And this is his story. He said that Gabby and Brian were kind of yelling, and Brian then swung at her with his left hand. He said it was like a slapping motion, but with a closed fist. Chandler said he was shocked by this. He was so shocked that he had to stop and think if he actually saw what he saw for a second. Then he said he was coming up to a stoplight going about 15 miles an hour, and he looked right, and they were parked in front of the Moonflower Co-op. He said they were on the passenger rear by the passenger rear tire. He said the blow, there was a lot of weight behind the punch and that the blow landed on Gabby's head. And then he said that she actually fell back. She fell into the side of the van and that she definitely felt what happened there. He went on to say that she hit into the van. She pretty much hit her back and probably the back of her head. Now you must know it's quite a strong blow if you're not only struck by it, but you sort of fall back and kind of stumble backwards, right? And then he says lots of people rushed over, and then he drove off, thought that this is actually being sorted out. So to summarize, he basically says, from what I witnessed, it was definitely him being the aggressor. I don't think she would have been the one that was, I don't think she should have been the one that was put as the aggressor. So what is so tragic about the Gabby Petito story is that you kind of get the sense that Gabby told the truth in that she hit him and Brian didn't. In other words, he didn't acknowledge that he hit her. He just said he pushed her away. And then we know how the story ended. What's also frustrating is that there was a third witness who saw it all happen, and yet that wasn't enough to stop things from happening. And it kind of makes you feel like, in future, if in doubt, call 911, because this guy's call could have saved Gabby's life, right? People did respond, but if this guy had responded as well, it could have actually saved Gabby's life. So it kind of makes you feel like, care more, don't care less. Try and do more in these situations. Okay. So that is the third section I want to deal with. And now we're going to deal with Loriu Vallow. Do you guys know that Loriu Vallow, they're not allowing cameras in the courtroom? Do you guys know about that? Before we actually get to Loriu Vallow, I want to show you guys kind of a recent picture of Loriu Vallow, if I can just find it. Where is it? It's not there either. Where are you? There it is. Okay. Have you guys seen this picture of Loriu Vallow? Let me bring it up a bit bigger. Have you guys seen this picture of Loriu Vallow? This is Doomsday Mom, the mother of Tylee and JJ, sort of indirectly in a way. But she doesn't look very good, does she? Let me try and compare that with another photo. Compare that to that. She looks a bit better there, doesn't she? There's another picture of her not looking terribly good. And another one. It's not that clear, but you can kind of get an idea. When you see Loriu Vallow in Hawaii, she actually looks pretty good. And when you see her in front of Alex Cox's home, no, it wasn't Alex Cox's home. Where was she? She was in front of her rented home, I think. She also looks certainly a lot better than she does seem to now. It's really amazing how there are so many different looks to Loriu Vallow. There she's got glasses on. These glasses are blue. There's another Loriu Vallow. So I'm looking for a good quality photo of the wedding. That's kind of the best I can find. But have a look at that image and then have a look at this one. It's quite a change, isn't it? So one does wonder, what is her state of mind right now? You know, one thing that I'm sort of thinking is, you know, has she seen the light? Has whatever indoctrination worn off? But then the other side, you sort of wonder is, was she indoctrinated or was she trying to indoctrinate? Was she someone who was caught under a spell, or was she actually trying to cast spells herself? I just think it's an interesting thought. Paradise Lost, yeah. So let me just show you guys. Someone says night and day. Let me just show you that contrast again. Sorry, there. So what we're dealing with now is basically the decision to not broadcast or live stream the trial. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and you might not like what I've got to say. I agree with it. I think that it's the right decision. I'll tell you why. Let me just bring up. So if you think about it, this case has actually been on trial for a while. In other words, they've been in and out of court. There've been a number of motions, right, taking place. And so why now? Why after so many motions and so many appearances, where you had photographers, you had live streaming, suddenly they've decided no more of that, right? And that is what this motion is all about, or the, what do you call it, the decision from the court. It's ordering the prohibition of video and photographic coverage. It says here, let me bring that up. It says here, the instant case has garnered significant media attention worldwide. The court has previously considered the deluge of publicity, and they've ordered a transfer of the trial from Fremont County to the most populous county in the state, Ada County, in order to mitigate the effects of pre-trial publicity and its detrimental impact on selecting an impartial jury. Where have we heard those words before? We seem to be hearing that more and more. In fact, that's also come up in the Caitlyn Armstrong thing, that there's a trial by media, but then, of course, her lawyer appearing in a documentary. What do you say about that? The court concurs with defendant's argument that the footage of August 16 hearing demonstrates an inordinate focus on the defendant, zooming onto her face throughout the vast majority of the hearing, regardless of who was speaking or what was happening. Now, if you think about that, an inordinate focus on the defendant zooming onto her face, where have you seen that before? Like, does that ring any kind of bell? How do I get rid of this margin here? anyway. Yeah, so what it feels like has happened is that the courts have kind of learned their lesson from the Amber Heard case, where you have people's expressions recorded, turned into memes, ridiculed, uh, turned into a circus. And so the court has basically just decided that's not going to happen here, right? We're not going to allow this court case to be held outside of the court based on blinks and smirks and whatnot, right? That's the lesson that the justice system is learning from how social media has been behaving. And that's kind of what I want to go into later on in this episode. So they say somewhere else, the court has previously been made aware and continues to be informed that documentaries, dramatization, and fictionalized media focusing on the defendants have already been procured and continued to be disseminated to the public. But I really want to focus on the words fictionalized media. So this is a true crime case, and they're kind of complaining about fictionalized media. In other words, fiction overpowering fact. Talks about when the case is a sensational one, tensions develop between the right of the accused to trial by an impartial jury. Going back decades, cases have been overturned because of issues relating to extensive media coverage. I think you're going to see, there it is, fictionalized movies. I think you're going to see more and more cases that are actually going to be, I'm talking about high profile cases, that are actually going to be jeopardized by social media, not just by the media. So it says here, the court is very concerned that continued visual coverage will impede the ability of the parties to select fair and biased jurors. Look at that, visual coverage, visual. In other words, it's people looking at the defendants and making fun of them and making memes of them and kind of a very superficial, what's the word, games that are played just based on appearances. The court determines that continued visual coverage poses a great risk to the administration of justice. Now, when you think about the visual aspect, what's quite weird is in the Alex Jones case, he was recently in court talking about, did he describe the judge as a tyrant, and did he depict her with laser beams coming out of her eyes? Think about that as a visual. The other thing that I think he did was, or that he was associated with, was the judge herself appeared to be going up in flames or inside flames. Just think about how that superficial visual interferes with what should be a much deeper and sensible discussion around facts and evidence, right? So it's quite a long thing. It's 8 pages long. And then the conclusion is defendant's motion to clarify media and the request to remove cameras from the courtroom is granted. There it is. And I must say, I agree with that. So you've got to kind of ask, what has changed? What has changed? If you think about this case, it's been quite a long time in process. There've been quite a few hearings. There've been documentaries all along. This isn't the first documentary that's come along. There's a documentary out right now on Loriu Vallow. None of that's different. So something has changed. What has changed? In my opinion, what has changed is Depp versus Heard. There's now this newfound appetite for witch hunts, for going to a high-profile case and tearing it to pieces and sort of turning people into clowns and caricatures. And the courts are basically saying, you know what, we don't really want that to take place. We don't want the court, we don't want the courtroom to be outside the court. We'd prefer it to be inside the court. I've actually always been a huge supporter of media freedom in the court. I've been a journalist inside court. I've written books based on a lot of press coverage, but since Depp versus Heard and since the advent of social media, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a moment, I think limits need to be placed on transparency and accessibility to an often rabid public. Let me put that in chat. So, like lately, you've kind of got this idea that social media is out of control, or that there aren't any controls, or that social media can do whatever it likes. Well, maybe the other argument is the courts can say, you know what, we just don't want social media to turn this into a circus. We've seen them turn something into a circus. We don't really want that to happen here. Do you blame them? Do you blame them? And so I think if you are a creator, or you are someone who's been doing that, you are either seeing a consequence of that, and you might say, okay, so they're not broadcasting that case, I'll target a different case. What I think you are starting to see is those open plains are now being more and more fenced in because people don't like what is happening, including legal practitioners, judges. They're worried about their juries, right? And I think they should be worried, right? So before you even take a case to trial, do you now ask, okay, so this case is going to be live streamed, and we're not going to sequester the jury, and we're going to expect them not to go into social media, but we are going to expect this case to trend because it's high profile. I think you've got a screw loose if you're thinking that that's not going to have an influence. I'm talking about before the time. So, as I say, when I last looked, the real court was inside the courtroom building, not outside. And that's what I think this argument's all about. If you're going to turn the court proceedings into a spectacle to laugh at and to have fun with, and then that becomes more, that gets all the attention, not what's actually happening in court, the real substance of it, then that's got to be prevented, right? And I must say it's a shame, someone who's written books about trials, quite a few trials, who sat in on these cases. I read a series of books on South African ex-murderer, and I got so much out of the live streaming of that case. So many micro expressions, so many nuances. So to have that taken away, really, in a way, it basically robs true crime writers even of covering cases. I mean, the only other way to do it is to go there and attend the trial. But even if you did that, it'd be very hard to record and absorb that level of detail. Okay, so now we've dealt with Loriu Vallow. I think we're going to move on now to, is it Madeleine McCann. Okay, we're going to move on to Madeleine McCann. So I don't really have much to say about Madeleine McCann, except, oh, okay. So if you Google Madeleine McCann right now, that's what you see. Madeleine McCann, police budget for Madeleine probe cut by £50,000. That's just come out, right? My question is, the Madeleine McCann case is like one of the biggest true crime cases, bar none. It's kind of as big as John Benet Ramsey. And what I find kind of ridiculous is you've just had a major development in the Madeleine McCann case. It's the most heavily reported missing persons case in history, right? And there's been a kind of a turnaround of late where the European Court of Human Rights has made a ruling. And because the mainstream media are ignoring it, everyone else is ignoring it. If you look at this, can you guys see this? If you look at this Google search, all of these stories are from 3 days ago, 3 days ago, 4 days ago, 4 days ago. And now there's this budget that's been cut. I guess the search for Madeleine, the budget's been cut. But what I'm trying to say is, because the mainstream media aren't covering this, true crime doesn't seem to be covering it. And as a result, it's not news. It's not simply not, it's not, what's the word? I don't know if it's not real, but it's not relevant. So is that how it works? If something's very popular and there's something driving the narrative, then true crime covers it. But if there's no incentive, then you just don't cover it at all. And I've kind of been quite surprised that such a huge case, the Madeleine McCann case, I've looked at some of my fellow creators, just didn't even mention it at all. This creator, that creator, that creator, that creator. It's one of the biggest cases in true crime history, even if you take away the missing persons case. It's kind of on a par with O.J. Simpson, on a par with John Benet Ramsey, on a par with Scott Peterson. It's one of the all-time biggest cases. And what's just come out is a major twist in that case. And it doesn't, what's the word? It doesn't reflect all that well on the British media or on the parents of Madeleine McCann didn't win that suit. And so, so then we're not going to say anything about it. It just makes you wonder, is true crime just based on following the money? Is true crime based on, I'll just follow the popular narrative, and when the narrative's not what I want to hear, then I'll just ignore it? And the same can be said for the mainstream media. The previous video I put up was, Stephanie says, it's unusual that the true crime community wouldn't jump on reporting on this. It's also interesting that the mainstream media just seem to have absolutely nothing to say about this. In fact, I haven't been able to so far find anyone, any media, that have really gone into the judgment in any detail. I don't think I've seen anything about sniffer dogs or biological traces. I don't think I've seen any of that. What's going on with that? Sorry, I don't understand. And let me bring myself back here. If I turn that argument on myself and I say, for example, I've covered the Loriu Vallow case quite extensively, and then I've just sort of stopped doing that. One of the reasons I've stopped doing that is my viewers don't seem particularly interested in it. and I'm aware of that, right? I'm interested in the story. I feel like I've got something to say about the story. In fact, I was about to kind of end my writing career or just semi-retire. But one of the last books I wanted to write was on Loriu Vallow. And the title, I had the cover of the book, I had the title of the book, Cult Figure. And anyway, in terms of YouTube, I would put up a video and it would barely get to 1,000 views. It would get like 600 views, and obviously someone else was in control of that narrative. East Idaho News, but other people also covering the case. And so there is that aspect. So you might say, how can you blame other creators or the mainstream media when you yourself, for example, on the Loriu Vallow case, why aren't you covering the Loriu Vallow case? And you know, if your argument is because I'm not getting views or I'm not getting paid, then aren't you like everybody else? The thing is, I do want to influence a story. So in other words, I want my opinion to matter. I want my opinion to be seen. I want my channel to care about what I've got to say. But if they don't, I've also got to be aware of that. But I think there's a difference between trying to tell a story that someone doesn't care about and trying to tell a story that someone wants to hear, but it's not actually true. Do you get what I'm saying? I think there's a big difference between telling a story where there's just not really interest in it, and you say, okay, well, then I won't tell that story, and someone who's telling a story to get interest, and so they go in a particular direction. And so let me give an example. I know that about 70% of people watching my channel want to hear the foul play version of the Kylie Rodney case. I've polled them numerous times. I can also read chats and I can read comments, and I can see the preponderance of bias or support or interest is in that particular case. So if I wanted to make life easier for myself, I would just tell people what they wanted to hear, or I would do analysis all about foul play. Could this person be a suspect? How about that one? What about this shirt that Kylie was wearing, etc., etc., etc. But I'm not trying to make money at the expense of telling the truth. I'm trying to keep true crime truthful. And if that means I earn less money, so be it. If that means I earn less viewers, so be it. But what I'm trying to get at is what's going on with the true crime community that you would prefer certain things that, I don't know, are they truthful? Are they truthful? You get where I'm coming from. Now, the image behind me is from a painter called Keith Alexander, and his images are from mostly Namibia. It's a desert country. It's, I think, one of the oldest deserts and driest deserts in the world, Namibia. And what you're seeing behind me is, I think they call it the desert. Anyway, it's an antelope. It's called a gemsbok. That's the name we give it anyway. And sometimes when it turns its head slightly, it looks like a unicorn because those horns line up. But Keith Alexander's paintings actually look like photos. They look like photographs of desert landscapes. But then what he does is he adds a twist. So he will put something there that actually isn't realistic. So, for example, a ship in the middle of the desert, which ironically in Namibia is not that unrealistic. But he tends to add dystopian elements that are fictional to something that is otherwise realistic. I love that. I love that mixture of reality, photographic reality, and this sort of inexplicable twist to it, right? Because to me, art on its own is quite boring. So if you just took a photo of a landscape, well, why do you need a painting of it, right? And so the twist that he puts there to me is kind of a creative interpretation of something that is otherwise awesome, but otherwise not really that exceptional, right? I appreciate that in art, but I don't appreciate that in true crime. I don't appreciate putting that twist into true crime. I want to just see if I can bring up another image from Keith Alexander, just to show you what I mean. Let's take that down. I hope I've got another image here that I can share with you. Do I? Oh, here it is. Oh, I was about to give up. So I am going to get to the next sort of installment that's related to true crime. Can you see this image? This is also Keith Alexander. Now, this is what I mean by it's reality with a twist. So you will see, for example, all of this is kind of photographically true. This landscape, you do have houses like this in Namibia that are abandoned, right? All of this is accurate. But the twist that is put into this is, for example, that looks like a figure there, right? That looks like it could be a person or it could be a ghost. You see that? That's the one aspect. The other aspect is, if you look over here, this part of the house is like something's happening. Someone lives here. There are paintings, it's inhabited, right? Everything in this house is right as rain. The lights are on somebody's home. It's painted. It is clean and livable, right? In terms of this fragment that's here, the doorway, right? But if you look at the whole picture, can you see it's quite disconcerting? That part of the house is alive, but that part is dead, right? Can you see how that there's a twist in the story? This is making you question the reality that you're looking at. It makes you wonder, am I seeing a ghost? Is there a ghost in this house, right? But can you see what he's doing here is he's taking a realistic scene and he's just putting a twist on it. And I always find the twist that he puts on it interesting. And I really like his art. I've got his art in my home, but I don't like it in true crime. I don't think doing this in true crime is right or honest or accurate or fair. It's interesting. It's interesting, but it's not what true crime should be. True crime should be following facts, following evidence, not following ghosts. This is not logical. Can you see that this thing here where this part of the house is functional and livable and what's the word? It is, it's completely normal, doesn't match the rest of the house, which is not functional, livable, or normal. In other words, this is a contradiction. This is not real. That's the bottom line. This is not real. If you take this image and you take everything in it, you take the background, these little bushes, the stones, everything, and you take that out of it, and you take that out of it, saying you take this out and you take that out, then what remains is 100% real. But then it's kind of a boring picture. It's a picture of a abandoned house in a landscape. It's not really that interesting. But as soon as you add these elements, now suddenly it is quite interesting. What's going on here? Who's this person? Except it's fictionalized interest. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? Thanks a lot, Terry. I'm glad that it's. Yeah, that's how I feel. Okay, so where are we? We've dealt with Madeleine McCann. So, by the way, just FYI, I have actually reached out to. Can you guys see that? I have actually reached out to the European Court of Human Rights to request the heads of argument in that case. Not something I often do. And they responded saying, I don't know if you can read that. Documents deposited with the registrar are accessible to the public. And then they said you must make a request via dedicated form, which I did do. And then I think I've got the document here. So then you fill in, anyway, this is another document that basically says you won't necessarily have your application accepted, but if it is, then you can, I think you've got to visit the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, France, in person. So they're not going to email it to you. So I really don't know if I'm going to go to France just in order to read the case file. I wouldn't put it past me, but anyway, we'll see. Let's first see whether they accept it. Let's look at some of your comments. Someone says there's going to be a news conference on the Delphi case. Bria says do it. Well, we'll see. Okay, so let's move on. I just want to bring up, I know this is a bit where angels fear to tread, but I want to bring up Alex Jones very briefly. What are your thoughts on this? So we were talking previously about Loriu Vallow and the case not being live streamed. Well, the Alex Jones case has been. And what we've seen is Alex Jones saying it's a kangaroo court. In other words, you know, if you are the court and you're worried that live streaming is and all of that exposure is going to what's the word, warp social media. What happens when you put a social media practitioner on trial? Well, isn't this the answer? So this is the judge in that case, and this is a screen grab of what I guess was represented, and it's now a plaintiff's exhibit. There is a kind of a the question was asked here, did you call the judge a tyrant in your show? And then he responds to that. And the other judge is telling him that's a yes or no answer. You can't kind of make up your own rules in the courtroom. You've got to answer according to protocols in court. And then there was also this. A picture of the judge in flames, and then that also becomes kind of a courtroom exhibit. In other words, someone who's on social media that seems to be criticizing a court case that they are being heard in, a court case where they are the subject of that court case, and then while the court case is taking place, they are still putting things out on social media, and then that is being shown in court, and you asked to explain that, and then at the same time that's being live streamed, and so even your audience are looking at that. Can you see how it's this weird cyclical thing that's taking place? But the question I kind of want to ask is, do you think social media is having more and more respect for the court or less and less? Do you think social media is having more and more respect and what's the word, acknowledgement of truth and justice, or less and less? What do you guys think? Raul Thomas says, how can they not televise the Vallow and Daybell case? Well, because of what you're seeing on your screen. Okay, so that brings us up to scratch. So we've done Alec Baldwin, Caitlin Armstrong, Gabby Petito, Loriu Vallow, Madeleine McCann, but just to say that no one's talking about Madeleine McCann. And now I want to go into the territory of the Lisa Lam case. Now, in terms of what a journalist wrote about that case, so I was studying up about it. Like I was trying to look at when there's a particular case that was also is this foul play or murder. What kind of happened in that case? Like how did social media respond, right? And they're responding in a very similar way in the Kaitlin Rodney case. Everyone wants to go the way of foul play, right? And so I came across an excellent article from Rolling Stone magazine that I want to share with you guys. So let's see if I can bring it up here. Where is it? Just give me a second. Playlist. So what I want to ask you guys right now is, first of all, is there anything wrong with true crime right now? In other words, is there anything wrong with our genre right now? So can all of you leave a response to that? Like literally every single one of you. Can you put a 1 if you think something is wrong with true crime, and a 2 if you think there's nothing wrong with true crime, that true crime's doing an awesome job, right? Okay, so is there anything wrong with true crime? 1 if you think yes, something is wrong, and a 2 if you think nothing's wrong with it. SW Firefly says social media seems to be causing less respect for all authority. It does feel like social media thinks it's a law unto themselves. So let's have a look. I just see ones. So seems like most of you are saying there's something wrong with social media. I don't see any 2s. Phil Formentino says what he doesn't like about social media is that 75% are behind a paywall. Okay, not quite what I'm getting at, but I guess it's relevant. Wow, I haven't seen a single person saying that social media is totally right in what they're doing. Jennifer says it's just unbelievable, this trend I'm seeing on social media, because that is what it comes across to me, a hateful trend. Yeah, that's a great comment. Thanks a lot, Jennifer. Jennifer says Whatever happened to a good and respectful debate? Yeah, exactly. I just see my viewers have dropped from like 130. Oh, we don't want to talk about that. Okay. So I see Pauline Buckles saying too that true crime's cool. Okay. So for all of those who voted number one, what is wrong? If something is wrong, what is wrong with it? If something is wrong, what's wrong with it? Can you guys hear the birds singing in the background? It's very weird because 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't know whether they're assuming my lights being on mean the sun's coming up. Cal Girl says, if you haven't noticed, everyone argues about everything. Pauline says, true crime is true crime, social media is something else. Okay, Pauline, I'm talking about true crime analysis on YouTube. Stephanie says, coverage for views, not truth. Karen Davis says, taken out of context. Wooble says, I don't actually know how to simplify all that's wrong with true crime social media. Terry says it's become over popularized. It's pulling people in from other genres. I must say, it feels like anyone can be a true crime expert now, even country music musicians. Yeah, so Raoul Thomas says the truth in true crime is often subordinated to views. Cal Gold says, I don't buy into it. I like what you say usually. Pauline says this ought to be interesting. I've got to say that I think kind of comes very close to nailing it. Angela Gallagher says there's an incredible amount of speculation in true crime online, and they will argue and say, what's wrong with speculation? We're all speculating. What's wrong with speculating? Well, what's wrong with following the evidence? What's wrong with following facts? What's wrong with investigating a case? What's wrong with following leads the way detectives and investigators do, and credible leads and likely scenarios? What's wrong with that? Okay, so now I'm going to take you into this really amazing article from Rolling Stone, and this article was directed at really the Netflix documentary that covered the Elisa Lam case. So it was really dealing with how Netflix told the story of a 2013 case 9 years later. And what blew my mind was how that analysis from a senior reporter, I think her name's E.J. Dixon, how that analysis fits, in my opinion, with the Kylie Rodney case, with what's happening right now in the Kylie Rodney case. And I was sort of wondering, am I being critical because I'm bitter, or because I'm insecure, or because I'm having a bad day, or because I'm in a bad mood? I mean, I haven't had a great year. Like I told you, today I was supposed to compete in a triathlon that I was kind of aiming for since March. Am I kind of in a bad mood, and so I'm just sort of what's the word, complaining? Am I just being negative, right? And so I felt quite validated when I found this article about something completely different that really resonated with me. And the question is it going to resonate with you? So let's see. Where is it? Okay, yeah, it is. So it's from this article. This is your final free article. Okay. My final free article. Let's bring that up. So if you guys want to read this article, it is an excellent article. It's from Rolling Stone. It was published by E.J. Dixon, or written by E.J. Dixon, February 25, 2021. So quite a long time ago. I really think you should read it, the whole article, on your own time. I'm going to just refer to highlights of it and then discuss it with you guys. Margie says, all because you're holding onto your integrity. Thanks for that. Okay, so can you see here it says, how the vanishing misses the real story of Elisa Lam. So you could even just, substitute the words here. Let's bring that up. You could substitute the words here, how X misses the real story of Y, right? In other words, they're saying, and the question is, what's wrong with true crime? Well, it's how someone's story misses the real story, right? And there, again, it says, but largely ignores the reality. That's what's happening in true crime right now, is it's ignoring reality. Do you guys agree with that? Do you agree that that is what's wrong with true crime? It's ignoring reality. So I want to bring up a couple of highlights from that article. I keep missing my spot. I think I need to close some of these windows. Can you guys see that? I suppose not. Can you see what's written there? It says, with little or no substance or little or no evidence to back it up. Red herrings, the tantalizing alternative theories or explanations splice into the narrative to build suspense. What she's talking about here are sort of tactics to create narrative, to create interesting narrative, right? She's speaking generally. She says, if you watch enough true crime documentaries, you start to notice a template emerging, right? It's a kind of a formula. They and then they talk about the experts are YouTubers, and they offer their own versions of what may have happened with little to no evidence to back it up. And it's all about red herrings, tantalizing alternative theories, or explanations spliced into the narrative to build suspense. Do you agree that a similar thing to that is happening in the Kaitlin Rodney case? So is it just me, or does true crime run away from reality even when it thinks it's running towards it? So Rolling Stone are not wrong. It is a template and it's not emerging. It's out there doing the rounds on platforms calling themselves true crime. The new experts in true crime are YouTubers, apparently. And part of their expertise seems to be assembling ideas based on no actual evidence. Let me say that again. Part of their expertise seems to be assembling ideas based on no actual evidence. Instead of genuine red flags, there are so many red herrings, right? These things here. Instead of red flags, there are so many red herrings that one can almost smell kippers. Yes, beware. These are fishy tales filled with small throat-snagging bones in them. Rolling Stone is also spot on about why tantalizing alternative theories are necessary. It's to draw out the narrative, to milk it, to monetize the sensation. Why waste a good story without building artificial suspense into it? And that, I think, is really where we are at right now. In true crime, we're seeing defective storytelling, right? I'm a storyteller myself. I've written over 100 books. And what I'm seeing is defective storytelling. When I say defective, I mean it's not telling an accurate story. It's deviating from the likely story. And it looks like it's deviating from the likely story on purpose to give it suspense, to turn the narrative into a marathon rather than a sprint. And she says here, what they're doing is they build suspense and justify the fact that the story is told in multiple installments rather than just the hour and a half of a standard documentary. In other words, it's being drawn out on purpose. It's being made a lot more complicated with a lot more intrigue, but in an artificial way. In other words, you're being duped. You're being misled. And you kind of wonder, you're the true crime community, not you, we are the true crime community. It's about recognizing manipulation, recognizing things that aren't true or aren't right. Well, are you able to recognize it when it's happening to you? It's fine when you can recognize it being applied to somebody else, but can you recognize it happening to yourself? So if the true story of Elisa Lam is that she suffered from delusions or paranoia, the true story of fake crime is that it can't seem to come to terms with its own delusions or speculative paranoia either. I don't necessarily think this is a malaise unique to true crime creators. I think it's a reflection of the new world disorder we live in. So I don't think not being completely in touch with reality is unique to true crime. I think it's part and parcel of our society. But I would like to think that true crime folks are more critical at thinking and discerning truth and reality than sort of the average person. I'd like to think that. But we don't seem to know what's real. We don't really seem to want to know, and don't seem too fussed about really finding out either. Do you guys disagree with that? Let me put that comment up. Let me put that comment up. We don't know what's real. We don't really seem to want to know. And we don't seem to, it should be too fussed with two O's. We don't seem too fussed about really finding out either. In other words, we live in a world that couldn't care less. And so we become careless about ourselves, about other people's realities, and no doubt about our own. The whole thing that I think one's got to think about here is, if you're careless about reality, you're also careless about yourself. If you're careless about someone else's reality, you're careless about your own. That can be quite dangerous. right? Brits Creek says reality can be scary and unsettling and sometimes boring. Absolutely. Daisies Forever says, well said. Cal Gold says, people all live in their own realities. They live in their own worlds. Sharon says, I only want to hear the real part. Secret Material says, I do want to know the truth. Stephanie says, spoon-fed speculations. So I want to bring up an excellent comment that that I think really captures what we're talking about here. I really thought this was brilliant. Where is it? 5-star comment. I hope she doesn't mind me putting it up. So I got this comment, I think today or maybe yesterday, and it's from someone called In Spite of Because of, and she said, yet I think that it's possibly more concerning to consider the why so many are more comfortable in this day and age to have accidents be something sinister. Is it because otherwise we are confronted with the fragility of life? That making poor choices can end your life. Bad things happen to good people in split seconds. That this can happen to your teenager or to you. It's not a very nice thought. Now, if I think about why I wasn't able to compete in a triathlon today, it's not because of foul play. It's because of the dreariness of life, that your body is fragile, that maybe you made some poor decisions in training, maybe you weren't consistent. It's not rocket science. It's kind of the drudgery of life. Things break, things don't always work out. It's not that there was an alien invasion that prevented me from being able to do something. It's something far more ordinary, unfortunately, something far more common. Or it's also due to human error. I may have made some mistakes. I may have tried to train too hard. The biggest mistake was falling off my mountain bike in a really dumb accident. These things happen. There wasn't like some kind of electromagnetic ray going through my brain and that caused me to fall. It was a lack of concentration. So I wrote here, we feel safe thinking we have simple answers. Can you guys see this? We feel safe thinking we have simple answers. So when there's a complicated thing like Elisa Lam or Kylie Rodney, then we want to have simple answers and an obvious bogeyman to blame. It's troubling and makes us anxious when answers are difficult, when we're not sure, when there's uncertainty. We don't want to be uncertain for any length of time, so we rush to fill that void. And that's what social media does. It's almost their role. It's almost a competition to fill that void as fast as possible. But it's simplistic, if not reductionist. The answers are more difficult usually than we think they are, and people seem to be more vulnerable in and of themselves. So when we tend to think some bogeyman committed a crime, well, the alternative is that someone was a human being and made a simple mistake. Okay, let's get back to this article. So here's another quote from the article. This is the story of Elisa Lam's death as told by the police and by the mainstream media reports. So she's trying to provide a review of the Netflix documentary, and she's kind of introducing the review by saying, guys, this is actually what the police reports say. And she's going to then compare that to what the Netflix documentary actually does, talking to YouTubers, talking to all the influencers, and how the documentary actually plays out in practice. She says, basically, the story from the police and mainstream media is it's a tragic accident that could have been prevented by any number of factors, such as her taking her medication. Just as simple as that. If she took her medication, she would have been fine. Or one of the employees checking up on her mental state. End of story. And then it says, but it's not the story told by the vast majority in this production, or the internet sleuths captivated by Lamb's story. That's not the story that they want to tell. The one of a tragic accident if you only took a medication. That's also not the story that these audiences want to hear. Do you see how the police and the mainstream media are up against an alternate multiverse conjured by internet sleuths? Right? Do you see the word there? Internet sleuths. They drive the narrative, even though the narrative isn't real. And we only find out that we've been hoaxed in the final act, when we've already paid the price of our attention spans. Naturally, the story told by the police and the mainstream media, the story you're told, couldn't possibly be true or so simple, while it ends up being the true story. Now take a moment to quickly skim through the highlighted keywords in this paragraph. And I want you to think about the Kylie Rodney case as you look at these keywords. Can you guys see that? Let's bring it up a bit bigger. I'll take myself out of that. Think about these keywords in the context of the Kylie Rodney case, bearing in mind this was written more than a year ago, dealing with another case. Various potential scenarios for the viewer to consider. Was she murdered? Was there subsequent cover-up? The answers to these questions are no and no. No recreational drugs were found in Lamb's system. It seems highly unlikely. Well, I'm sure that, I think that there may be recreational drugs in Kylie's system. I think that is likely. Then, weakest of all, tormented by the accusations, flimsiness of these theories, take their sweet time examining the merits of each one. Right? Stephanie, that's definitely quite scary. I must tell you one of my stories. Beverly Lawyer says no amount of evidence can change an idiot's mind. That girl says, I love this. I'm so sharing this with some people. So that girl, if you also want to share this link, they might find it quite interesting. Okay. Let me bring myself back. And let's go on to the next thing. So does this ring any bells? Flimsiness, weak arguments, highly unlikely scenarios, various potential scenarios, blah, blah, blah. As a storyteller myself, an author, as I said, of hundreds of magazine articles, thousands of blog posts, over 100 books, I know narrative. Rolling Stone nails it by calling this a storytelling tactic. What's going on here isn't true crime analysis. What's going on here is a storytelling tactic aimed to incite interest and excitement. That's not investigative. That's not analytical. It's not investigative or analytical. It's manipulative. So here's another excerpt from the article. The aim of this storytelling tactic is clear: to regenerate interest. In other words, in an apparently collective effort to figure out a puzzle, your favorite storytellers are lying to you in order to make the story more compelling than it really is. true insights in true crime are rare and infrequent. They're hard to figure out because they're hidden. But by manufacturing stories, you can cheat your way through. You can pretend to find insights to pretended intrigues, while in reality, just meandering around the periphery of a made-up labyrinth. You'd imagine obsessive lie spotters and sleuths with honors in let me read that again. You'd imagine that obsessive lie spotters and sleuths with honors in declaring unofficial persons of interest could do the same with those spinning tall tales at them. And I think it's an open question. Why can't they? Why can't you? Why can't we? So here's another, let me just bring it up a bit bigger and bigger. Can you guys see that? So she writes, E.J. Dixon writes here, in true crime discourse, rarely is there space afforded to the family members of the victims. She goes on to say, equally infrequently is there discussion about how such obsessive scrutiny of the grisly details of someone's death detracts from the focus of how they spent their time on earth, who they loved, what their passions were. In other words, this grisly focus on death, isn't it a bit of an imbalance compared to the fact that they also had lives? There was also another dimension to this person. They also had a backstory and a life. Their entire life doesn't come down to their death or the circumstances of their death. Should you spend 95 or 99% of time analyzing the last moments and the cadaver and the autopsy and all of that? What about looking at who that person really was, who they loved, who they were, like who they were as human beings? In other words, you have a bit more of a complete and whole and balanced view. You're not just looking at death and cadavers and blood, right? Kelgul says it's showing the issues we as a society have with death. But Kelgul, the thing that's so ironic is there seems to be kind of a flirtation with death. I'm not afraid to go in that area. I put up a video, Kylie's last moments, and no one wanted to watch it. And yet, when you go into the AWP narrative and they talk about, like, how did she appear? Was she wearing clothing? What did you see? That's really kind of trying to visualize human remains. So when I said, what were Kylie's last moments, that is the absolute crucial aspect of any true crime investigation. What were the last moments of this person? And yet I found when I put that up, people were like, this is too distressing. This is insensitive. Well, then what is the rest about? So if you're talking about suspects and murderers, is it just a weird kind of game? I don't know. This seems odd. There's another word for it, but I don't think I'm going to use it. In other words, the focus in true crime is constantly on the fictionalized aspect of death in all its grisly but fake detail. Incidentally, the word grisly here is spelled Grisly, and I didn't use it. The Rolling Stone writers use it. I'm just repeating it. But there seems to be something mentally ill about this constant focus on the last lost moments of someone's life, rather than on who they were as a person in life. Where's the balance? Isn't the identity, the real life lost, also part of the story? And I think this applies equally to a perpetrator as to a victim. If you go into their lives and you realize, wow, you actually had quite a nice life, or you were you had a chance at a fairy tale, and then it looks like you gave up, or you were intimidated, or you were unsure, right? It's important to go into the backstory, not only of the victim, but if there's a perpetrator, also of the perpetrator. And so seldom are true crime communities willing or able to do that. True crime wants the perpetrator to be a monster, to be a cardboard cutout figure. They don't want to imagine that it's somebody just like us. And invariably in true crime, somebody just like us has a really bad day, and whatever happens is almost inevitable. But we don't want to believe that we could be a perpetrator. Because we believe perpetrators are nothing like us. And so we give them labels. They're monsters or psychopaths or covert narcissists. We don't want to actually think about them as people, because that would then make us quite frightened. If that can happen to them, couldn't it happen to us? And so I think what creators are doing in true crime is actually doing a kind of a service, which is people want that people have got anxiety, and people want the anxiety about the fabric of society, about criminals, about the darkness that's out there. They want it simplified. They want it reduced to a manageable size. But what that ends up being is lying to yourself, because that's not reality. Okay. And so not to deal with the real life, the real person, and instead to fixate on the not necessarily real but lurid aspects of a person's tragic death is to turn a human being into excrement. To reduce a person who they were to all they were in their final moments. That's where the money shots are clearly. But money shots, as you can imagine, in true crime and elsewhere, exclusively obsessing over the macabre and pretend intrigues are devoid of meaning, right? It's devoid of meaning. Not getting to know the real person in these stories means you can never really get to know the reality of these stories. You know, I find that so weird how in the Kylie Rodney case, for example, there's so much attention on Jagger or on this person or on that person. What about Kylie? Why not spend more time getting to know Kylie? The other thing is, by sensitively getting to appreciate who a person is, it becomes all the more real, the permanence and the tragedy of their deaths. In other words, there's a sense of proportion and perspective that here is a fully represented person, a fully explicable person that now is no longer with us. And so what you experience is that dichotomy, that life is precious, that life is fragile, that life is temporary, that life is here one day and gone the next, right? That's the important lesson to learn, is that here is a person who had a life. This was their life. And now their life is lost. And these were the circumstances of it. But it's only when you go into that you come away with it and you say, phew, I'm at least alive. What lessons can I learn from this tragedy? But also, I think I need to live. Something terrible happened in this situation. But you know what? I'm still here. What can I do with that? You're not going to get to that point if you keep fixating on the excrement, on the one intrigue after the other. You've got to have a sense of overall perspective. It's got to be realistic and then come back to your reality. Sharon says, do you write for Rolling Stone? Article has some depth. I would have loved to. I have written for GQ, which is not a bad magazine. So Rolling Stone tells it like it is with this penultimate counterpunch. She says, quote, being forced to consider the myriad social and cultural factors that contribute to most of these tragedies would be to rob the armchair detectives of their fun. So well said. Brilliant, brilliantly expressed. Let me put that up. This is excellent. This is really well said, well written. Being forced to consider the myriad social and cultural factors that contribute to most of these tragedies would be to rob the armchair detectives of their fun. So in other words, what is the antidote to fake crime? What is the problem with true crime, right? It's that we don't look into the social things that are going on, the social realities. We don't look at the cultural factors going on either. In the Kylie Rodney case, when I spoke about Kylie being isolated, I got a heck of a lot of hatred and pushback and criticism. They were like, how dare you imply that Kylie was isolated? And then I thought, wow, am I wrong? Like, is there someone that knew her and she was actually kind of the most socialized teenager in Truckee? But then her own mother said that homeschool, they didn't actually have a choice with homeschooling, and she used the word isolated herself at the celebration. But what I'm trying to get at is that word is starting to address the common circumstance of our society. How isolated are you? How isolated are we? How does that play into dysfunction? How does that play into breakdowns and things that shouldn't happen? I must say, in so many of the cases that I've covered, one of the key ingredients in crime is a lack of socialization. I see it over and over and over again. One of the key ingredients of crime is someone who is either the victim or the perpetrator or both that become sort of disconnected from society. They become, to some extent, either isolated or they're sort of disconnected from their families, from those who should care about them, right? A healthy society looks after itself. It looks after those in it. There's a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. Is that still the case? And if you think about social media as a village, and I'm being completely honest when I say this, I can't think of a more toxic, dangerous, nasty, and what's the opposite of affirmative? Negative environment to bring up a child. So if you think of, it takes a village to bring up a child, the last way you want to bring up a child today is by social media, by having social media educate and influence children. Do you agree with that? And if that's the case with children, I think you've also got to think beyond children. We need to start thinking about social media as adults, as mature adults, and say, I don't like what's happening here. Do you raise your voice and say that and say, you know what, I don't think this is really appropriate. I don't think what's happening here in this discussion is helpful, right? Or simply ask that question. Is this discussion helpful? Is this discussion appropriate? Is it kind? Is it truthful? Is it sincere? Is it but most of all, is it true? Okay. So at True Crime Rocket Science, let's take that away. So at True Crime Rocket Science, this is what we try to look at: the social fabric, the cultural zeitgeist. And all of that leads to an entirely explicable and often predictable malaise. Often in true crime, I find when you study it enough, it feels like what happened was waiting to happen. When you study these cases closely enough, when you get to know the personality, when you get to know the previous incidents that have taken place, when you get into the shoes of the people involved, you kind of end up with a feeling of this was inevitable. This was harder to avoid than to not avoid. It is absolutely inevitable. And then when you see that, and it's quite terrifying to see, you sort of wonder, am I in some of those dynamics? Am I in some of those situations? Do I have things in my life that are driving me towards a inevitable destruction? Do I have magical thinking? Am I totally unrealistic about certain things, or worse? So it seems to me fake crime's tactic is to avoid that story. They're worried it's not going to be exciting enough. The story about how did this tragedy that occurred emerge out of the social fabric? How did the cultural zeitgeist cause this to be some kind of predictable malaise, right? And I think part of the answer to that is that's quite a difficult story to tell, because you've got to make the effort. You've got to do real digging. You've got to get to know the real people. You've got to be quite intuitive and quite intelligent. You've got to kind of get all of these facts, all of this information, and you've got to kind of integrate it into something that actually makes sense. Not everyone can do that. You've got to take this whole kind of cosmos, this whole cosmology of detail, and you've got to kind of translate that onto a single canvas and say, this is the simple picture. Yeah, this is the simple picture. Okay, I've got two more things I want to quote here. So she writes, can you guys see that? She writes, the end of The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel has an episode titled The Hard Truth. So it's 4 episodes long. The 4th episode basically gets down to brass tacks, right? And basically she says, only in the last episode is there an attempt to confront this reality, providing a glimpse of what the series could have been. She says, now I realize that the way to honor her is to accept the truth that this was a tragedy of an accidental death. So in other words, at the covering full circle, you kind of get the sense that all these creators, all these YouTubers, all these influencers that were part of this narrative that took 4 episodes, kind of go, you know what, I kind of wish that we didn't go down all of these weird paths, right? Except that they do that in the documentary as well. To me, a little bit, well, it's a question, isn't it a little bit hypocritical? If you go to the bottom part here, it says, one vlogger expresses contrition, it's at the bottom. Another expresses contrition about having engaged in conspiratorial thinking for so long on his channel. Of course, they only acknowledge that at the end. Before that, they actually share those conspiracies in the fabric of the series. So the impression I get is that they feel like they can't tell the true story. They're not going to earn enough money keeping it real, so they fake it to make it. E.J. Dixon signs off on a protest against the artifice of true crime with this masterstroke. So this is the last thing that I've highlighted. This is again also the antidote to fake crime, right? So in a word, if you say what's wrong with true crime, I would say there's a lack of self-awareness, there's a lack of proper investigation, there's a lack of following evidence in a realistic and cohesive and sort of sensible way. What's the antidote to fake crime? Well, the answer is self-reflection, self-awareness, being realistic, probably above all. So let me read this. This type of self-reflection is jarring to see in the context of the true crime genre, which is not exactly known for either its self-awareness or its propensity for discussing social issues, but it is necessary, right? So one thing we want to see of more in the future is when a certain case happens, let's discuss social issues around that. So for example, in the Kylie Rodney case, shouldn't we maybe talk about the dangers of drinking and driving? And I feel like I addressed that. I feel like I addressed the statistics of like what is the most common way teenagers die, and the answer is in accidents. And then I dealt with all of those statistics. And the death rate for car accidents is much higher for teenagers and young adults than for older adults. All of us know this. So why aren't we talking about it? I mean, to me, it's something that happens every year. Every year, seniors are about to embark on their fairy tale all over the world. And then they have a party, and then some of them don't survive that party. Why can't we have a conversation about that? It could save lives. It could create a culture of cautiousness within that desire to celebrate with a modicum of caution. What's wrong with that? Couldn't that actually save lives compared to running after abductors all the time? So the other thing that you can do is talk about when you were a teenager and some of the things you did, and it might actually help teenagers who may be watching this go, wow, I need to be a bit more careful. Anyway, it says here, as long as there's a cultural appetite for such stories, the onus is on the storytellers to emphasize what we should truly be taking away from them. And it isn't threadbare conspiracy theories or gruesome autopsy report details, right? Let me say that again. What we want to take away from true crime, from these cases, isn't like constant conspiracy theories that have kind of a threadbare basis, or autopsy report details on and on and on, right? And then she concludes as saying, Elisa Lam was much more than the horrific way that she died. That's true of all people in true crime in these cases. They're much more than the way that they died. So let's also address who they were as people. Let's also bring that to life. Let's not bring their death to life. Well, let's not only bring their death to life, let's also bring their lives to life. She ends up saying, by entertaining these red herring theories, it ignores the reality in this case of mental illness and the threat it can pose. And so that's what we want to do. We don't want to ignore the realities that come up in these cases. So we deal with a case and then something happens where somebody dies. Why can't we deal with that reality and try and deal with that reality and the threat that poses to all of us? Why must we run away from that reality and deal with fake and fictitious realities that's not really going to help anyone? In this particular case, Elisa Lam, let's talk about mental illness. Let's talk about the reality of psychosis, the reality of that people are irrational. In the Kylie Rodney case, let's talk about for example, is the amount of the active ingredient, for example, in cannabis, has that been increasing over the years? Also, the chemical constituents in recreational drugs, has that changed? What about the impact of fentanyl? How dangerous is all of that been and becoming? Why don't we have those conversations? And as far as I know, there's a creator on YouTube that's covering this case that has been, I think, a drug user. And instead of using that experience, that first-hand knowledge, that insight, it seems everything but that. I'm just saying it's potentially a wonderful opportunity to talk about like cautionary tales, and also how you can get into trouble playing around with substances as a teenager, right? That's it. So do you see, at the end of the day, what we need to do in true crime is reflect on ourselves and our society. I mean, isn't that the original mission? Isn't that the original brief of true crime, that we reflect on our society? A crime was committed in our society. How did that happen? Instead of a crime was committed in our society, let's go and look for aliens and serial killers and I don't know, whatever nonsense you want to think about. Something happened in society. Well, let's deal with it. If you think about reflecting on ourselves and our society, so you kind of turn your fingers inward, you turn the focus inward. You're saying, what's going on with me? What's going on with my society, right? That's the opposite of blaming, pointing fingers, witch hunting, red flag, red flag, red flag. You kind of trying to say, what's going on in our world, what's happening, not what's happening with you or with you or with you, what's happening with us. Am I becoming more narcissistic? Not that's a narcissist criminal. Are we becoming more narcissistic? Why? That's a more valuable question. When I started writing books full-time, I didn't want any of my narratives to be gratuitous. I didn't want it to be violent voyeurism. I wanted to explore the life lessons, not only from the tragic conclusion of a particular person, but also from how they lived. The reward for such deeply intuitive journeys into difficult terrain like identity and relationship dynamics is self-awareness, a trait that seems sadly lacking in our increasingly shallow society. So I've always felt that true crime is this wonderful opportunity to figure out who we are, right? By repeatedly looking at a completely new person in a completely new context, listening to what's going on, putting yourself in their shoes, and instead it seems just another way of just another form of distraction. There's potentially so much we can gain from a deep analysis on this, and then we end up just not doing that, just completely missing it. So let me read that again. The reward for deeply intuitive journeys into difficult terrain like identity. Who is a person? How did they self-identify? What were their dreams? What were their sort of connections to the social fabric? What were the difficulties they were going through? What were the challenges? What were they good at? Where was their heartbreak and difficulty in their lives? What was good? What wasn't so good? Right? The relationship dynamics are really, really difficult as well. They're difficult to figure out the reality of those, but you can. And to the extent that you can look into someone else's life and get a sense that it resonates and that you see them and that you start to feel a sense of really deep compassion and that you feel who they are. You feel a sense of them, not a sense of yourself superimposed on them, but a sense of them, a sense of this person. That helps you with your self-awareness. You're attempting to become aware of somebody else, who they are, helps you with your own self-awareness. And that is something that's lacking in our shallow society. We are living in a very shallow society. So the threadbare analysis we see in true crime, anchored in slippery slime, is a reflection of the slippery slope we, as a superficial society, are teetering on. We won't think critically, and perhaps some have even lost the capacity to think for themselves. But in the same way, victims like Elisa Lam were a lot more than an autopsy report. We can be too. We can learn how to be effective at life, not ruminate on the dead deeds of death and destruction. That's the other thing, is if you are following true crime, what about looking at the life that was lost, right? And then that reminds you of your life that you still have, but maybe you've also lost touch with it or lost some aspect of it. I think there were a lot of us who looked at Gabby Petito and thought, I want to go out and see America, or I want to go out and travel, right? When the Mo Wilson case happened, I kind of suddenly felt like, well, I want to go to Austin. Austin looks like a great place to ride bikes. I mean, I'm interested in cycling. In other words, something that doesn't make you fear death, but want life. Yvonne Phillips says, thank you. We have much to work on, but we are trying. Let's bring that up. Thanks a lot, Yvonne. I'm almost done. So to get the real deal in true crime, as in life, we have to be brave. We have to do that thing in life that is so difficult, even terrifying to do. We have to confront reality. We've got to confront ourselves. We do that by making concerted effort to get to know these people in these tragedies, not on our terms, but on their terms. We have to step into the unknown, not of things we think we know, but the real unknown, the unknown that leads us to somewhere unexpected, somewhere where we don't know where it's going to go, somewhere that we can't predict. But following not what we think we see, but what is self-evidently there. That's what following the evidence is I don't know where this is going to take me, but I'm going to follow the evidence. I'm not going to follow some kind of pre-programmed thought, some kind of pre-programmed conspiracy theory with the end already set. I'm going to follow whatever I find, step by step, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, and just see where it leads. I'm going to let go of my bias, and I'm not going to project onto the case. I'm just going to see where this and that piece of information and that one takes me. And I can tell you now, it's going to take you somewhere unexpected. if you allow it to, if you can get yourself out of the way. True crime seems to want to believe not only in fairy tales, but fairy tale deaths, right? Not just fairy tale lives, but fairy tale deaths. It may seem as if that's a safe place to spend your attention span, but the reality of all fairy tales is that they exist to protect us from an ever expanding nightmare. Except they don't really protect us. Fairy tales don't really protect us. In fact, fairy tales create nightmares. Get real, wake up, or stay in Wonderland and get busy conjuring monsters that eat their own tails while all your beds are burning. You know, it's this whole idea of you're trying to avoid the nightmare by creating a fairy tale, but that creates a nightmare. The only way that you stop the nightmare from happening is by confronting the nightmare, not by creating a fairy tale. And the way you confront a nightmare is by acknowledging reality, acknowledging yourself, seeing what's there. And we need practice at doing that. Do you guys, sorry, do you guys agree? We need practice. We need practice confronting reality because we do it so poorly and so seldom. And we need practice confronting ourselves for the same reason. But that's the only way you improve the world. It does feel like you're improving the world when you step into a fairy tale, like when you go and watch a movie. I went to watch Ticket to Paradise, and it was a nice break. Of course, when you come back out the movie, you've spent whatever money, and now you're back to reality. And now you must get focused again. The true terror of the Elisa Lam case is the true terror of true crime and the true terror of our lives, and that is ignoring reality. The true terror of what happened to Elisa Lam was that Elisa couldn't tell what was happening to her. She couldn't tell the difference between reality and non-reality. And look at what happened to her. And then you must ask yourself, what if you can't tell the difference? Couldn't something like that happen to you? I just mean an unhappy ending. And so this is my final word. Ignoring reality leads to an unhappy ending for you too. So let's try and start figuring out what reality is in cases, criminal cases, the cases that we're covering. That's the first step to figuring out our realities. Will you guys join me on that journey? The 130 of you who are here. Okay. Robbie says, Nick, I saw a manned space satellite moving over the clear dark sky tonight. Someone pointed it out. Wow, that's cool. We need continuous practice. Today's society is far too busy for any self-reflection. The big problem with our society right now is that we're distracted. That's why you've got to filter certain things out. You've got to not respond to every little notification, not be like part of an algorithm. You've got to win back your individuality, your self-determination, your consciousness. You've got to assert yourself in your world, not have an algorithm decide who you are and what you do. And, you know, your life is basically all around this thing. Isn't your life bigger than this? Shouldn't it be? Is this real? Is this the sum of your reality? Or would you like a bigger life than this? And what's in this? Oh, I got a notification. What's that? The way that you grow as a human being, the way that you evolve and develop is through experience. And what social media robs you of is exactly that. Social media takes time and attention and life away from you, where you're not experiencing life. And the only way to experience life is to actually experience it. And how much time is wasted in true crime, going down all sorts of unnecessary rabbit holes to steal away your attention. And that then makes you even worse at dealing with your reality. It makes you even worse at experiencing reality, because it's kind of trying to convince you that reality is a lot scarier than it is. Can you see how harmful it actually is? How not good it is for our society? Wooble says, incredible insights, mind blown in the last 3 hours. Thanks a lot. Wow, Woobles, you've been here from the beginning. I appreciate that. Your personal experience is a journey, yeah. Stephanie says, you're giving the tree fruit. I'm going to keep hanging in there. You and this channel give me hope. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Appreciate it. If you're not sure what that's about, I planted 2 trees, in fact, right outside this room, downstairs, and one of them's catches all the sunshine, or it catches the sunshine it needs. The other one is planted quite close to the wall, and throughout the past 6 months, it hasn't gotten any virtually. Well, for 6 months it's gotten 0 sunlight. And a peach tree is a what's the word? It's a full sun tree. And so I've been worried that this peach tree that's in the shade, is it going to have the resources to get itself to the light? Does it know also that the light's coming towards it, right? We actually just passed I think you call it is it this autumn, it's not the equinox, or is it the equinox? But anyway, the sun has just passed the equator, as far as I know. So right now, your days in the northern hemisphere are getting shorter and nights longer, and obviously it's going to start getting colder. Whereas where I am, the days are now getting longer and the nights shorter. But the other thing is that the light is moving towards where this tree is. But anyway, the interesting thing is the tree that's in the sun has already produced, it's starting to produce fruit, and the fruits are bigger already. And this other tree is trying to get more of itself. It's just touched the first rays of sunshine in 6 months, and now it's also trying to produce fruit, but within the context of being in the shade. And that's something we can all think about, is the light is out there. Where you're going to get the resources to grow, you've got to find them somewhere. You've got to find them to some extent in yourself. You've got to have faith in the fabric that the stars in a way are aligning, that the seasons are changing, and that may benefit you. But you've also got to do the work of getting yourself to the light. Even if the light is out there, you're going to have to do the work. And you can't compare yourself to the other tree. Your circumstances are different. Maybe you're unlucky, and that tree is unlucky. I mean, I had to plant the one somewhere and the other one somewhere else. But it could also be that the tree that was in the shade will grow faster and assert itself, knowing that life is more difficult than the tree that's on the other side. Who knows, it may actually be a stronger tree because life was hard in the beginning. Who knows? Deborah says, you're speaking my language here. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. So Kai Kat says, Nick, you're a true crime counselor. Thanks for that. So, wow, this is over 3 hours. It's quite long for a recap, isn't it? But I did really want to deal with the what's wrong with true crime question. And I think you've got to acknowledge that this reporter recognized something that is happening, and we need to acknowledge it and also address it, right? TCRS says your default picture here on YouTube is an awesome picture. It's literally how they say picture's worth 1,000 words. Thanks. Robbie says, are both peach trees a similar shape? The one that's in the shade is a little smaller, but it was smaller to begin with as well. Thanks a lot, Wooble, as well. Thanks a lot. Wooble says, thank you for always opening my stagnant mind. I truly appreciate you. You're my favorite poet. What a compliment. I think you must give yourself some credit. I don't think your mind's stagnant. Mad Mechanic says, listen to Rush, the trees. It may sound silly, but the band Rush has inspired my life since I was a kid. Your life may seem small, but you can always aspire to be great. Helena says, I love how you teach to be better people. That's to me what I want. Every case that we come out of, I would like us to come out of it in some way richer and somehow deeper people. If anything, in this case, I've learned that an automatic vehicle can be pushed or pulled even if it's in gear. I didn't know that. Also, I got to know someone in my community who drives a Honda. I was crawling around in her vehicle. I kind of got to know her better by trying to figure out this case. I also actually said to my own father, we've got a farm and we've got quite a narrow bridge crossing the farm. And I said, for goodness sake, if you drive over this bridge, make sure your windows are open, right? I think we've all learned something about the reality of the risk of driving a modern vehicle and it ending up in water. That's something I've definitely learned. Phil says, thanks for the great convo tonight. Thanks all, stay safe. So I think I'll stay on for another 2 minutes. Pauline Buckle says, Nick, who's the artist in the picture behind you? His name's Keith Alexander. And apparently we met him once on holiday. We actually met him once on holiday, which is quite strange. You guys want to see some more of his art? As I said, it's kind of got a strange. I'll put a link to who he is in chat. There he is, Keith Alexander. There's another painting that he did. Sorry, it's a little bit out of focus, but there's a weird thing, a man reflecting in this mirror in this very desolate environment. And it looks like there's a figure there in the back as well. Can you guys see that? Oh, let me bring it up. Can you guys see there's a figure here? And it looks like there's a figure there as well. Do you see that? So I'll just show you guys a few more Keith Alexander paintings. Some of them are definitely quite interesting. Okay, here we go. They're quite small, unfortunately. If I bring it up a bit bigger, can you guys see that? Can you see in the foreground? There's kind of a hole in there. That's why I say there's kind of a twist in all of his images. Can you see that over there's a shadow? Looks like of a person. A lot of the themes of his art is the destruction of civilization. I wish I had clearer images, but there's another one. Another one. As I say, the theme is the destruction of civilization. There you have a staircase going to a house that doesn't exist anymore. These are pretty good. Can you guys see that? Thanks a lot, Michael Palmer. Can you see the eeriness in that particular image? There's something that he does quite often, a ship in the middle of sand. Again, the theme being the destruction of civilization. Sorry, that's a different artist, sorry. So let me bring up a couple more if I can. They're not really that many here. Let's see what else I can find. So can you see the disquiet in some of these images? Look at this one. Again, it's this idea of the destruction of civilization. That's absolutely true. It's a very subtle color palette. Very subtle. Have a look at that. Imagine that happening in reality. There's another eerie image. So can you see in this one in particular, can you see how there's a man standing there and it just creates this very, very eerie, twisted sense of what's going on. I mean, this is an abandoned house, but there's a guy standing there. It's pretty eerie, isn't it? That's really it. They are also haunting. Sinking ship in sand, yeah. See if I can find another one. The Fallen General and His Ruin, 1997. So if you look at this one, it looks fairly straightforward. The pier, And then you look at how it's sort of chewed away at the bottom. Now these pillars aren't going to last very long. And then there in the distance is a ship, obviously going nowhere. Again, it's this almost Mad Max world, right? It's this kind of Mad Max environment. Yeah, there's no head. Some of his art's got like a science fiction feel to it. So if you look at what is going on over here, it's all very photorealistic, right? I mean, that looks like a completely normal landscape. That there looks like a completely normal landscape, but this is like 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? Can you see the rock over here breaking? I'm not quite sure what this is, if it's ice or marble, but it's trying to represent the destruction of civilization. Here's another one. So very solitary, somber scenes, not necessarily somber, but certainly disquieting. Look at that tree growing out of a vehicle, out of an old vehicle. Look at this. This is a nice, fairly high resolution image. I quite like that. But just look how immense that cloud is, right? There's something foreboding just about that. This cloud almost looks like an explosion. And then there's this crow in the foreground. Now that's a picture I wouldn't mind in my home. You know, isn't that quite beautiful? But there's something disquieting about it nevertheless. There's another one of a ship. This is, I think, real. This is not invented. Wreck of the Edward Boland. This is a real wreck in Namibia. And there's something weird about it. It's like, how did that ship, it's like, are the seas shifting kind of thing, right? Farmyard. It makes you kind of wonder, are we ever going to see scenes like this in our lives? You know, are we ever going to see the sea turn to desert, cities turn to ruin, and then ships and cities in this sort of context? Yeah. Load more. Are there still more? Look at that. That's quite a jetty. Can you see once again, he's kind of got looks like a figure standing there. Looks like there's someone waiting for I don't know, a visitor. Yeah, all the vehicles are abandoned. And look how there's this sort of space inside or under this pillar of rock as well. Now, as far as I know, I could be wrong, this particular image is supposed to have a map inside of it. I'm not quite sure where it is. I'm not sure if it's this part, but it's supposed to be a map somewhere. I've just heard something like that. But there, once again, there's a small person. Can you see? There's a small person, and this is like a staircase coming up here. and you just kind of get a sense of scale, that nature is totally overpowering people, and that people are lost in these incredibly immense landscapes. They're all alone and they're totally lost in their landscapes. He also does things like, can you see over there, there's a round hole, and there he's got a stone that looks like an egg. There's another one. Anyway, you guys get the picture. Excuse the pun. So yeah, if you're interested, go and have a look at Keith Alexander, on your own time. I've got a couple in my home. I've got a couple of Van Gogh, Keith Alexanders. In fact, around me, I've got there are 3 Keith Alexanders in this room. If I take this green screen off, let me quickly do what? How can I get rid of myself? Just do that. So I'm going to show you if I can, the image that's behind me. What happens if I remove this background? Let's have a look. So the picture right behind me, that is also Keith Alexander. That's really one of my favorites. So it's the Fish River Canyon, but it's sort of represented in the front almost like a chessboard, and how the chessboard basically degenerates into a broken landscape. So I just find incredible beauty in that combination of geometry and kind of geography, right? So that's my artistic sensibility. Mel Stiller says, I love his work. Yeah. No, Soikai Ket, I think he died some years ago. Yeah. He died in 1998. He's been gone 24 years. You guys want me to just quickly read his backstory? It's quite interesting. And then I'm going to go. I don't want to be here longer than 3.5 hours. So let me just bring that up. Over a relatively short career of 25 years, the artist created an impressive career oeuvre of over 500 immediately recognizable photorealist and surrealist paintings. Specific memories from his life experiences were used as motifs in his work throughout his career, beginning with the memories of the 10,000-acre farm his family owned in the country of his birth. He attended boarding school in London, where the damage sustained during wartime bombing raids still lingered. And upon returning to Southern Africa, he became increasingly aware of the contradictions inherent in his deeply colonial and political fraught upbringing. So you can actually see that there's a cultural, a political activism of a kind in his art that is actually telling a much bigger story in a subtle and symbolic way, sometimes even a not so subtle way. His decision to study art at the University of Natal was based on the affordability of the books for the course, and he majored in sculpture. And then it says he attempted to make a living as a sculptor, and then he said, in 1974, he started painting instead. My perception of what art should be and had begun to change. Sorry, my perception of what art should be had begun to change. In fact, I came to the realization that I wasn't a sculptor at all. Gradually, my thoughts turned towards putting paint on canvas, and also to the surrealism I'd researched for my honors thesis. I wonder if there's another painting I can show you guys here. This one's quite interesting. The plants on the outside and the sort of brokenness on the inside. Are there any others here that are worth showing? That one's quite interesting. So can you see what is going on here? Can you see it looks like a table that is being, you know, someone's having dinner at this table. There is a plate and, you know, it all looks normal until you see that there's actually sand. That's sand. And the candle is out. There's actually some smoke there. Don't know if you can see that. Wonder if anyway, the candle is blown out, and then these panes in the glass are broken. And that also looks like a figure standing over there. So again, you get this disquiet. At first glance, it looks very polished and neat and safe, but ultimately there's something broken and dysfunctional and very disturbing about it, right? Anyway, I've kind of gone beyond the time I wanted to go on. I hope you guys found this last bit quite interesting. I mean, I'm very interested in art myself. So Tina says, this is taking me back to art school. Well, there are chairs. The one is just sort of almost in the sand. Chef reflection. As far as I know, some of his art was conjured while he was on marijuana. I believe that that's part of how he was able to create such compelling landscape. So the surreal aspect, to some extent, comes from a surreal mindset. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Anyway, that's something my father told me. Whether it's absolutely true, I can't say for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, that's it from me. What was he like when you met him? I can't really remember meeting him. I can remember vaguely some people there, and to my shame, I don't really even remember talking to him. But apparently, I think I was a young teenager or something. But there were a lot of characters kind of where we went on holiday. So I don't actually remember any specific interaction. I'm sorry. Melissa says, thanks for this extraordinary live. Okay. Is it like when artists used to paint fruit, and if you look closely, there would be a small area that was overripe? The table was set, destruction happens quickly. Yeah. Things fall apart. Okay, guys, that's it from me. Thanks a lot, mods who are here, also members and new subscribers. And just remember, let's keep it real in true crime. And let's pay attention to those who aren't keeping it real and just kind of take note. Just kind of recognize that it's happening. And it's not good for us, right? It's not good to be distracted from reality. when you're trying to find the truth, when you're trying to tell the truth. Yvette says you are so spot on by saying care more, not care less. I could not vote for two, so I voted for Caitlyn Armstrong. I'm hoping to cover Caitlyn Armstrong in the future, but I just kind of need something to start happening now in the legal sense. I am going to try and watch the last ride and certainly report on that. So look out for that. Everyone says good show, excellent live. Thanks, guys. Okay, thanks very much. Enjoy your Sunday. Good night. Sleep well. See you next time.